"Stop, I'll pay," the cowboy shouted, when he saw the native woman who once saved him in the market. Dry Hollow stood still beneath the noonday blaze. Heat rippled off the dust, turning every shadow into smoke. In the middle of the square, a young Apache woman was dragged by the wrists thin, sunburned, clutching half a broken carrot like it was gold. Laughter cracked from the crowd, cruel and careless. A stone arced through the light. Then a hand caught it. Lucan Doyle stepped out from the shade, coat gray with trail dust, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. He looked at the girl, then at the jeering faces around her. Without a word, he bent down, picked up the crushed carrot, and laid 2 silver coins on the stand. "I pay for the carrot," he said quietly, "and for every hungry soul that forgot what mercy tastes like." Silence fell heavy. The wind shifted. Even the flies stopped buzzing. And that's how it began. By mid-afternoon, the sun hung like hammered copper above Dry Hollow. The town was little more than a row of warped porches and sagging signs, where dust rose higher than hope, and every sound carried the rattle of thirst. A cracked water trough in front of the saloon reflected no sky, only a film of dust that never settled. Lucan Doyle walked the street in silence, the brim of his hat cutting a narrow band of shade across a face carved by wind and regret. His gray coat hung loose on his shoulders, its edges stiff with old trail salt. On his left wrist, beneath the frayed cuff, a pale mark coiled faintly, 2 punctures from a rattlesnake bite that had nearly taken his life years ago. No one knew the story, and he never offered it. He was a man who spoke little and listened less, except to the creak of leather and the slow breath of horses in his corral beyond town. He'd served once, under a flag he no longer believed in, chasing shadows across the Chiricahua Mountains. When the war ended, he kept the habit of silence, but left behind the uniform. Now he broke horses for a living quiet, patient work that paid in calluses more than in coins. That afternoon, when he stopped the crowd from striking the Apache girl, he hadn't planned to. The act came as sudden as a cough of wind, but as he looked into her eyes, dark, steady, unflinching, he remembered that same gaze years ago, under the white heat of the desert, when his body was dying and a stranger's small hands had poured water between his lips. The woman stood now before him, older but unmistakable. Her name, he would learn later, was Nayeli. The dust streaked her cheeks, her hair, black and heavy, clung to her shoulders. Beneath the grime and torn dress, she carried herself like someone who'd forgotten how to kneel. When the merchant spat near her feet, she didn't flinch, only lowered her eyes to the carrot as if it were a prayer she'd dropped. Lucan offered her his coat. She hesitated, lips pressed tight, before taking it not from gratitude, but from a quiet dignity that refused pity. The crowd watched, uneasy, as the cowboy and the girl walked out of town together, leaving behind the smell of heat and shame. Outside, Dry Hollow. The land opened into the San Simon Valley, a vast bowl of ochre and sage. Heat shimmered above the plain. Yucca blades cut the wind like knives. Lucan's small ranch waited there, a cabin with 1 window, 1 horse corral, and too many ghosts. When they arrived, he pointed toward the stable. "You can stay there, just for the night." Nayeli didn't answer. She stepped inside, her shadow stretching long across the dust. Lucan lingered by the door, listening to the restless horses settle, to the low hum of cicadas swelling through the dusk. He thought he'd brought home a debt to repay. But as the desert cooled and the stars gathered above the ridges, he began to wonder if it was something else, something older than guilt, and harder to let go. The night spread across the valley like spilled ink. Crickets thrummed from the mesquite, and the faint trickle of water in the trough was the only sound that marked time. Lucan Doyle sat by the cabin window, hat in his hands, watching the outline of the stable where the Apache girl had disappeared. He told himself she'd be gone by sunrise. That was the simple, sensible thing. But morning came, and she was still there. The first sound he heard was not the horses, but the scrape of a bucket. When he stepped outside, she was crouched by the fence, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hands working with calm precision. She was milking his old brindle cow, the one that usually tried to kick at anyone who came near. Now it stood quiet as a church bell. Lucan froze, half amused, half bewildered. "You don't have to do that," he said. Nayeli didn't look up. "You gave me food, I give back. It wasn't charity." "No," she said simply, setting the bucket aside. "It was debt. I pay mine." Her voice carried a weight that didn't match her small frame. It wasn't defiance, it was balance. The same tone a hunter might use when returning something to the land. Lucan could have argued, but her calm steadiness left no room for pride. Later, when he brought her a plate of beans and bread, she sat on the porch but ate apart from him. Her movements were careful, almost ceremonial. Every crumb she saved for later. Every glance toward the horizon seemed to measure the distance between this place and somewhere far beyond. He noticed she never turned her back to the open desert. By noon, Caleb Boone rode up the path, a barrel of a man, sunburned and laughing, the sort who filled silence before silence swallowed him. He spotted Nayeli at the well and raised a brow. "Who's that?" Lucan kept his tone dry. "A traveler." Caleb grinned. "Pretty one, too. Didn't think you had the habit of inviting company." "Doyle." Lucan shot him, a look sharp enough to cut a rope. "Drop it, Boone." But Caleb wasn't the type to drop anything. His grin lingered until he noticed something stranger than the girl, the faint smile tugging at Lucan's mouth. He blinked. "Well, hell. Lucan Doyle knows how to smile." Thought that skill died in him long ago. That night, after Caleb left, Lucan sat on the porch. Nayeli was there again, sitting a few steps away, sewing a tear in her sleeve with a thorn for a needle. The firelight caught her profile, the strong cheekbones, the fine line of her jaw, the scars on her wrists like faint bracelets. He wanted to ask how she'd come to Dry Hollow, what happened to her people, but something in her posture said the questions would only open old wounds. So he offered silence instead, the kind that held respect rather than avoidance. When a coyote called from the ridge, she looked toward the sound. "Back home," she said quietly. "They called that the cry of the searching ones." He watched her a long moment. "You think it'll find what it's looking for," she smiled faintly, eyes still on the dark horizon. "Not tonight." The desert wind slipped between them, carrying the smell of sage and dust. For a while, neither spoke. Then she rose, brushing off her skirt. "You let me stay one night. I stay one more. Tomorrow, I go." Lucan nodded, though something deep in him stirred a faint tug of recognition, the echo of a bond. Neither of them yet understood. As she walked back toward the stable, the door closing softly behind her, he realized how long it had been since his house had carried another heartbeat. The night felt less empty, and that frightened him more than solitude ever had. Days stretched long in Dry Hollow country, where even silence had a sound. The wind combed through the grass, carrying the rustle of locust wings and the soft jingle of Lucan's spurs as he moved about the corral. Each dawn he expected to find the stable empty, the girl gone back to the hills. But each dawn she was there, feeding the horses, her hair braided, her eyes unreadable. At first, they spoke only when work demanded it. She mended the fences where the boards were weak. He fetched water from the well. When she cooked, he ate without comment. When he spoke, she listened, but never met his gaze for long. Yet the days began to fold into one another, like the slow turning of a wheel. One morning, Lucan came back from checking the cattle to find Nayeli kneeling in the dirt, tracing lines with a stick. They weren't idle marks, they formed circles and symbols, the kind that looked like maps. "What's that?" he asked, crouching beside her. She didn't stop drawing. "The valley. The wind runs this way. See, it brings storms from the south." He looked closer. The crude map was surprisingly accurate, the dry creek bed, the ridge to the east, even the small spring he'd found months ago. "You've been here before." Her hand hesitated. "My people were..." Before the soldiers came, he didn't push further. The words sat between them like a scar reopened. Later that day, she saw him in the corral, trying to break a wild bay stallion. The horse reared and nearly threw him. Without thinking, she slipped through the rails, murmuring something in her language short, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The stallion froze, snorted, then lowered its head. Lucan blinked. "What the hell did you just say to him?" "I told him you are not the kind to fight unless you must," she said simply. "He believes it more than you do." That was the first time she smiled at him, small, cautious, but real. After that, something shifted. They began to share moments that weren't born of obligation. He taught her how to patch a saddle. She taught him to find healing roots among the mesquite. Sometimes, she'd hum a song while working, the melody rising and falling like the wind on canyon walls. One night, after supper, he handed her a harmonica, old and dented. "You play?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "Can't seem to make it sound right anymore." She took it, turned it in her hands, and blew a single note clear, trembling, then another. Slowly, she found a tune. When she stopped, he was smiling. "I guess it was the player, not the harmonica," she said. He shook his head. "No. Guess it just needed someone who remembered how to breathe." The next evening, Sheriff Royce Harlan rode up the trail, his badge dull in the sunset. He dismounted slowly, like a man arriving at a place he didn't trust. "Evenin', Doyle," he said. His eyes flicked toward the porch where Nayeli stood, silent as a post. "Heard tell you been keeping company with one of them reservation runaways." Lucan's jaw worked. "You heard wrong." Harlan stepped closer. "Maybe, maybe not. Folks get uneasy. Seeing someone like her walking free ain't good for business." Lucan met his stare evenly. "You here on business, Sheriff, or gossip for a heartbeat?" The air between them was taut as a gunstring. Finally, Harlan tipped his hat. "Just words of caution, Doyle. A man can lose more than friends out here, keeping the wrong company." When he rode off, Nayeli's voice came soft behind Lucan. "You risked your peace for me." He turned, the setting sun carving his profile in bronze. Peace was never mine to keep. That night, he dreamed of smoke villages burning, screams swallowed by wind, his younger self standing still while the flames devoured everything in sight. When he woke, sweat cold on his neck, he saw her sitting by the fire outside, awake too, as if she had felt it through the walls. Neither spoke. The desert around them was still, except for the sound of an owl calling somewhere beyond the ridges. Over the next few days, they worked side by side as if nothing had changed. Yet in small ways, it had. When she poured his coffee, her fingers brushed his once. When he passed her the water canteen, she didn't look away. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something quieter, the fragile peace of two people who'd stopped running, if only for a while. On the fifth evening, as a low wind swept across the valley, Nayeli looked up from the porch where she was sorting herbs. "The Chiricahua Mountains," she murmured, eyes distant. "That's where my people sang before sleep. When I was a child, I thought their songs could reach the stars." Lucan followed her gaze to the dark blue horizon. "Maybe they still do." She smiled faintly. "Maybe." And for the first time since she'd come to his land, she didn't look like someone ready to leave. The wind that evening was sharp enough to taste. It came from the west, carrying the scent of whiskey, dust, and something else, trouble. Lucan sensed it before he saw the riders. He was mending the corral fence when a voice slurred through the twilight. "Well, if it ain't the saint of Dry Hollow himself." Eamon Pike sat crooked in the saddle, a bottle swinging from one hand and a grin carved deep in the other. Beside him were two strangers, rough men, dust-coated and hungry-eyed, the kind who made their living on blood and bounty posters. Lucan straightened, jaw tightening. "Evenin', Pike. Evenin'," the drunk sneered. "Heard you been harboring yourself a sweet little squaw. Word is, she don't belong here, belongs to the reservation. Or the man who paid for her." The bounty hunters laughed. the sound dry as gravel. "We got papers saying she's a fugitive." One said, "That makes her worth $40 to us, alive or not." Lucan's voice stayed low. "You're not taking her." One of the men spat. "Don't make this holy, Cowboy. We just came to collect." Behind Lucan, the cabin door creaked. Nayeli stood in the doorway, the lantern behind her, painting her in gold light. She said nothing, but her gaze burned steady. Eamon pointed toward her with his bottle. "There she is. Told you I wasn't lying." Lucan moved then slow, deliberate, stepping between her and the men. His hand rested near his holster, but his voice stayed even. "You've had your drink, Pike. Now ride home before the night sobers you." But the drunk's pride had been lit. "Don't you preach to me, Doyle. You always thought you were better than the rest of us." He swung the bottle at Lucan's head. The sound of glass shattering cut through the air. Lucan staggered back, blood trickling down his temple. The bounty hunter on the left reached for his gun. Lucan drew faster. The night erupted in gunfire, brief, blinding, final. When the echo died, 2 bodies lay in the dirt. The third horse bolted into the dark, Eamon clutching his bleeding arm and screaming curses until they faded into the distance. Lucan stood breathing hard, smoke curling from his revolver. His shoulder burned. A bullet had grazed him. He turned to Nayeli. "You all right?" She nodded, eyes bright but calm. "You could have been worse." She stepped forward, tore a strip from her sleeve, and pressed it against his wound. "It will fester if not cleaned," she murmured. Her hands moved with the surety of someone who had done this before. Lucan winced, but didn't pull away. The nearness of her, the smell of rain-soaked earth in her hair, the warmth of her breath unsettled him more than the pain. When she finished, she looked up. "They'll come again. I know. You can't stay. I know that, too." By dawn, they had packed what little they owned, a saddlebag of food, a blanket, a canteen, his rifle, her pouch of herbs. The horses were ready, restless under the low red light of morning. They left without looking back. The house, the corral, even the dead men, they let the desert reclaim them all. For 2 days, they rode through the San Simon Valley. The land stretched endless and merciless, where wind cut like knives and the sky burned white. Lucan's wound reopened, the blood seeping through his shirt. He tried to hide it, but Nayeli noticed. "Stop," she ordered. He didn't, so she pulled his reins. "Stop." He swayed, almost fell from the saddle. When she caught him, his weight nearly dragged her down. They were dismounted by a cluster of rocks, where a dry creek bed twisted like a scar. Nayeli searched until she found a patch of cactus fruit and a small seep of water in the shadow of a cliff. She crushed the pulp, mixed it with herbs, and bound his shoulder with a band of her own skirt. Lucan stirred, eyes half open. "You don't have to. Be still," she said sharply. "You saved me once. Let me return it." Her tone softened as she dipped a cloth in water and pressed it to his forehead. "The desert always tests those who cross it. It does not forgive weakness." He smiled faintly through the haze. "Guess we make a fine pair then." That night, they built a small fire. The stars above the valley blazed like scattered embers. Nayeli sat close enough for warmth but not touch. After a while, she spoke. "Why did you save me in town, Lucan Doyle?" He stared into the fire. "Because once, someone saved me. I owed her my life. And if that someone was me," he looked at her, then the flicker of flame mirrored in her eyes. "Then I just paid late." She didn't smile, but something in her face softened, like a curtain lifting. They traveled for 3 more days, keeping to dry washes and narrow canyons where no one would find them. When they finally stopped at a stream threading between 2 low mesas, Lucan said quietly, "We'll rest here a while." The place was hidden, almost sacred. Cottonwoods leaned over the water, their roots gripping the stones like fingers. Nayeli knelt to drink, then stood, droplets glinting on her chin. "This land remembers," she whispered. "Even when men try to burn it clean." Lucan met her gaze. You sound like someone who still believes it can forgive. She shook her head. Not forgive. Just begin again. He thought of the 2 graves they'd left behind, the house that would crumble into dust, and realized she was right. There was no forgiveness out here, only the chance to start over, if the land allowed it. He reached out, brushed a fallen strand of hair from her face, then pulled his hand back before he could think too much. That night, as thunder rumbled beyond the horizon, they sat together under a low rock shelf while rain began to fall soft, patient, washing the blood from his sleeve and the dust from her skin. When lightning flared, she looked at him and said, almost to herself, "You carry fire inside, Doyle. But fire can make or unmake. You must choose." Outside, the desert drank, and for the first time in years, Lucan felt something other than guilt, a fragile, flickering hope, born from the sound of rain. The rain lasted through the night, steady and unhurried. By morning, the desert smelled alive again, the sharpness of wet sage, the sweetness of soaked dust, the faint musk of horses shaking water from their coats. Lucan woke to find the fire still smoldering, and Nayeli crouched beside it, feeding twigs into the flame. Her hair clung damply to her back, her eyes reflecting the soft gray light. For the first time in days, neither of them looked hunted. He sat up slowly, wincing as his shoulder pulled against the bandage. She noticed, passed him a cup of warm water. "Drink," she said. "The fever's gone, but your body still remembers pain." He took it, fingers brushing hers. "Guess it remembers more than that." They spent the morning in quiet rhythm, gathering wood, tending to the horses, washing what little they owned. Each small act felt like a ceremony of survival, as though the land was watching to see if they deserved to remain. By noon, the clouds had drifted east, leaving the sky clean and painfully blue. Lucan sat beneath a cottonwood, his revolver disassembled across his lap. He wasn't cleaning it, he was staring at it, as if the thing might speak first. Nayeli approached, her steps silent on the damp sand. "You think they'll follow? Maybe. But not soon. Not through this mess of country." She nodded. "Then what weighs on you now?" Lucan looked up, the question cutting closer than she knew. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Then I need to tell you something," he murmured, "and you might hate me for it." She didn't flinch. "Say it." He set the revolver aside, palms flat on his knees. "Years ago, I rode with the 7th Cavalry. We were sent south to Chiricahua territory. Orders were to clear the villages. I didn't fire a shot that day, but I didn't stop the men who did. I watched the flames take everything. I watched people run." The words came like stones pried loose from his throat. "When I found you in Dry Hollow," he continued, voice breaking slightly, "I recognized the look in your eyes. I'd seen it before through smoke, through screams. I've been trying to pay that debt ever since, but it doesn't wash off." Nayeli stood very still. Her face was unreadable. The silence stretched between them, long and aching. The only sound was water dripping from the leaves above. Finally, she spoke. "The fire you speak of it reached my village. I was a child. My mother, she stayed behind to carry the old ones out. I ran." Lucan's breath faltered. "Then I—" She raised a hand, stopping him. "You didn't hold the torch. I didn't put it out, either." Her gaze softened, not forgiving. "Not yet, but understanding. The fire burned everything I knew," she said quietly. "But when the storm came, the land lived again. That is how I learned fire kills. But it also feeds the soil. What you carry," she touched a hand lightly to his chest, "is still ash. It can grow something, if you let it." He stared at her, unable to speak. That night, they built a small shelter by the stream logs. Branches, a roof of stitched hides. The rain had softened the ground, and together they pressed seeds into the earth beans, herbs, and the last few carrot seeds she'd saved since Dry Hollow. When she finished, she looked up at him and said, "If you seek forgiveness, don't ask for it. Plant it." Lucan knelt beside her. "Is that what you're doing? Yes, she said simply. I plant because I must live. For a long time, they worked side by side. As twilight fell, fireflies rose from the grass, their glow flickering like shy stars. Lucan watched her hands, calloused yet graceful, and wondered how such a life could have come from so much ruin. Later, inside the shelter, they sat by the small fire. Her shadow moved against the wall like a slow dance of flame and memory. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something, a silver coin, dulled by years of dust. This was one of the coins I dropped that day in town, he said. The one I used to buy your freedom. I've kept it since. Guess I thought it'd remind me to stay human. Nayeli turned it in her hand. Then keep it, she said softly, returning it to him. You already paid what you owed. He hesitated. And what about what I owe you now? She met his eyes, calm and steady. You owe me a roof that does not burn, a garden that grows, nothing else. Outside, thunder muttered far away. The desert wind passed through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of rain and smoke, of endings and beginnings. Lucan leaned back against the post, exhaling. You know, I used to think this land was cursed, just dust and death. And now, he smiled faintly. Now I think maybe it was just waiting. Nayeli watched him a long moment before replying. The desert does not hate, she said. It only tests who dares to stay. The fire crackled between them, and for the first time, the silence that followed was easy, like breath drawn in after a storm. Outside, under the stars, the first green shoot pushed through the damp soil where they'd planted. Neither of them saw it, but the earth had already begun to keep their promise. A year passed like the slow turn of a wheel-grinding stone. Seasons didn't change much in San Simon Valley, only the light did. The sun rose softer now, its fire gentled by new green. What had once been barren ground began to hold color beans climbing the poles, corn tasseling yellow, herbs thick with scent, and in the smallest patch near the stream, delicate leaves trembled above dark soil carrots, thin and stubborn, holding fast to life. Lucan Doyle woke early most mornings, same as before, but the world no longer met him with emptiness. The cabin, once hollow and echoing, breathed with quiet noise the cluck of hens, the creak of a cradle, the murmur of a woman's voice. He stepped out into the yard and saw Nayeli crouched in the garden, her skirt brushed with dew. Her hair had grown longer, tied with a strip of worn red cloth. She was humming that same melody she'd sung the night the storm first found them. It moved like water, low and steady, the kind of song meant to hold the world together. At her side toddled a small girl, barefoot, bright-eyed, her skin bronzed by the sun. They called her Little May, a name Lucan had chosen, though he never said aloud why. The child wasn't theirs by blood. She had been left sick and alone outside a wagon trail months ago, and Nayeli had found her half dead from fever. Since then, the baby had learned to laugh before she'd learned to fear. Lucan knelt beside them, pressing a hand into the warm dirt. She's growing, he said, meaning both plant and child. Nayeli smiled faintly. You sound surprised. Maybe I am. I never thought this land could hold anything soft. It holds what we give it, she said. You stopped feeding it with anger. He looked around the rebuilt fence, the horses grazing beyond, the smoke rising gentle from the chimney, and realized she was right. The place once meant to hide him had become something closer to home. By midday, Caleb Boone rode down from the ridge, dust trailing his horse. His grin came before his words. Well, I'll be damned, he called. You've turned this patch of hell into a garden. Lucan clasped his arm. You found the trail easy enough, Sheriff Harlan told me. Caleb said, lowering his voice. He says the bounty's gone, and the papers are buried. Guess he figured the law owes you a debt it can't repay. Lucan nodded, a quiet relief settling in his chest. So Dry Hollow finally forgot. Not forgot, Caleb said, glancing at Nayeli. Learned. Nayeli handed him a jar of preserved fruit. Take this to your wife, she said. Tell her it came from the earth you once called dead. Caleb looked between them both, then chuckled. You two have done what no preacher ever could, made Dry Hollow believe in grace. When he rode off, Lucan stood watching the dust fade until it was only the shimmer of heat. Then he turned back toward the cabin, where Nayeli sat in the shade, mending a tear in Little May's dress. You could go back, you know, he said, now that it's safe. Her hands stilled on the fabric. And leave this. He hesitated. It's not much. It's enough, she said simply. Home is not a gift someone gives you, Lucan. It's the ground you decide to stay on. He sank down beside her, silent. She looked at him then, not the wary, guarded look of that first day in town, but the steady gaze of someone who had chosen to see him whole. The afternoon drifted into gold. Bees moved between blossoms. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled over the dragoons. Lucan reached for her hand. It was rough, calloused like his. But when their fingers met, the world seemed to still. I thought the desert only devoured, he said softly. Turns out, it can raise life too. Nayeli leaned her head against his shoulder. Only if someone stays to keep it alive. He smiled, eyes closing. Then I reckon I'm stayin'. Evening came slow, with that amber light that makes everything look half-remembered. The three of them sat on the porch as the sun slid behind the mesas. The baby laughed, chasing fireflies across the yard. Lucan watched her run through the tall grass and thought how easily a heart could learn to trust again when given time and quiet. The wind carried the smell of rain, and Nayeli rose to gather the laundry before the storm. Come, she said. Help me before it falls. He did, though the first drops caught them anyway. They worked quickly, laughing when the sheets whipped against them. Wet and heavy. The laughter surprised him. It rose from somewhere deep, somewhere unbroken. When the rain turned heavy, they ducked under the porch roof. Breathless, dripping. Nayeli brushed the hair from her eyes. The land thanks you, she said. Lucan shook his head. No. It forgave us both. She smiled. Then we are even. Not yet, he said, reaching for her hand. The carrot you remember, her laugh came quiet and warm. You still think in debts. Old habits die hard. She pointed to the patch near the fence. Then go see for yourself. He crossed the yard, boots sinking into soft mud. There, beneath the gray sky. The carrot tops shimmered green. He knelt, brushed the soil aside, and revealed one bright root pushing through small, imperfect, but whole. Behind him, Nayeli's voice carried through the rain. The first one always grows slow. It's the land testing your patience. He turned, rain tracing down his face. And if we pass, then the rest will follow. Lucan looked at the carrot in his hand, dirt clinging to its orange skin. He laughed, quiet and full. Then I guess we're even. After all, Nayeli joined him under the falling rain, Little May in her arms. The storm blurred the world into silver and clay, washing away every trace of the men they once were. When the thunder eased, they stood together on the porch, the child giggling against Nayeli's shoulder, Lucan's hand resting on her back. The smell of wet earth rose thick and clean, like something newly born. He looked out across the valley, where the rain moved in shimmering veils. Funny, he said softly. All that time I thought I was lost out here. Nayeli smiled, pressing the child's small hand into his. You were, until the desert found you. The last light fell across the garden, catching on the tender shoots that trembled in the wind. Somewhere beneath that soil, a single seed split open its root, reaching down, its green tip pushing toward the sky. And for the first time in years, Lucan Doyle didn't think of what he'd burned or lost. He thought only of what had begun to grow.